Good morning. So today we start Chapter 6. And Chapter 6 is all about what we call quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are equations with squares in them, like x squared, okay? So, and we're going to be talking a lot about those different types of equations, but for today we're just focusing on one thing, and that is how to solve equations like these with x squareds in them using square roots. So, let's first talk about a little bit of background info or some things that you maybe should already know but that you're going to need to remember as we're going into this lesson. So first of all, what is a square root? What am I talking about when I say we're solving with square roots? Well, hopefully you're at least familiar enough with a square root to where if I were to ask you, say, I don't know, the square root of 25, you could say, oh, the square root of 25 is 5. Well, why is that? What does that mean when I say I'm taking a square root? The reason the square root of 25 is 5 is if I take 5 and square it, it gives me 25. So when I'm asking you for a square root, what I'm really asking you is, when I say what's the square root of 25, I'm asking what number would I have to square to get 25? Well, I could square 5. Alright, so 5 squared gives me 25, therefore 5 is considered to be a square root of 25. But we have to be really careful. If you were to type into a calculator, square root of 25, your calculator is going to tell you 5. But there's actually more than one answer here, because there's something else that I could square to get 25. Okay, I could also take negative 5 and square it, and I would get 25. Okay? Because when I say negative 5 squared, what that is really saying is negative 5 times negative 5, and two negatives make a positive. So negative 5 times negative 5 gives you 25. So your calculator always gives you the positive answer for a square root, but it's important that you keep in mind that for every square root of a positive number, you actually have two answers. You have a positive answer and a negative answer. Okay? So really I could say square root of 25 is negative 5 as well. Okay? Because of this fact. One of the shorthands that we use sometimes then is if I want to show both answers, I can use this plus or minus symbol. So square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. And that shows my answer could be positive 5 or negative 5. Okay, so that's a way of wrapping both of these answers into one. Okay, so just keep in mind that when you take a square root, you're always going to get two answers. And for that reason, every one of these equations that you solve is going to have two solutions. There is one exception to that, and we'll talk about that. But for the most part, every time you solve something that has a square in it, you're going to end up taking a square root to solve that. And when you take a square root, you get two solutions. Okay? That's going to be, you're going to hear that a lot in this chapter, talking about having two solutions. So that's the first thing I wanted to make sure we address. Second thing is to bring you back to equation solving a little bit. Okay? So when I give you an equation to solve, remember that equation has been put together or assembled with PEMDAS, with order of operations. Okay, so PEMDAS is the order that we do our math problems in. Okay, you may remember me talking about this back when we talked about equation solving. However, with equation solving, you're trying to undo things. You're trying to do things backwards and like dig out that variable and figure out what x is equal to. So with equation solving, it's almost like you're working through it backwards. And so you're going to hear me say SADMAP a lot in this chapter. Okay? Maybe not a lot in this chapter, but a lot in this section. Okay? SADMAP is just PEMDAS backwards, and this is how you undo things. This is how you solve. So PEMDAS is how you evaluate, which means this is how you do math. But equation solving is like undoing things. So this is how you solve. Okay, it's by undoing everything backwards. And that's going to make more sense in a minute when we start doing some examples. So when you're solving equations, the first thing you undo is subtraction and addition. Then you undo division or multiplication. Then you undo exponents, and the very last thing you undo is anything in the parentheses. Okay? And you'll see what I mean again when we do some of these examples, but I would maybe mark this at the top of your paper. Just write the word SADMAP. Okay? And then I'm going to refer to that as we do our examples. So just make sure you're copying down. We're going to do 5 examples together. Make sure you're copying down the work and the answers that I come up with. Okay, so here's our first example of something that we're trying to solve. X squared plus 4 is equal to 20. And let's keep SADMAP in mind. I'm going to just jot that up here in the corner. So the first thing we want to undo is any subtraction or addition. And I do have addition right here. So I'm going to undo that plus 4. How do I get rid of a plus 4? That's what you're asking yourself. Well, I would subtract 4. And I would get x squared equals 16. All right. And then, how do I get rid of a square? Well, and back to SADMAP. I don't have any division or multiplication to worry about. Okay, there's nothing being multiplied here, but now I have an exponent. Okay, so my exponent is a square. How do I get rid of a square? Well, I take a square root. Okay, the opposite of squaring is square rooting. So as soon as I square root x squared, that's going to give me just x. Now, what you have to be careful of here is as soon as I take a square root, as soon as I hit this step right here, okay, where I'm taking a square root of a number, I'm going to get 2 answers. I'm going to split off into 2 different possible answers. Because the square root of 16 is 4, because 4 squared makes 16, the square root of 16 could also be negative 4. And you must have both of those answers to get full credit. So as soon as you take a square root, that's where you say, okay, now I have 2 different possibilities that I'm dealing with. So these would be my answers, x equals 4 or x equals negative 4. And again, you would have to have both to get full credit. You could also write your answer as x equals plus or minus 4 to show that positive 4 or negative 4 would work. Okay, so this is just like equation solving, just like stuff you've done before. Now we're just adding in this extra step of when you have an x squared, you get rid of it with a square root. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, so now I'm looking at 4x squared minus 1 equals 15. And a lot of people get that they're going to have to take a square root at some point. The thing that people struggle with is when to take that square root. Okay, and that's where SADMAP, that's why I keep emphasizing this SADMAP thing, which I know makes me sound like a lunatic. You've got to get rid of everything else first. So you've got to get rid of your subtraction and addition, you've got to get rid of your division and multiplication before you take care of that exponent. So yes, I have an x squared in here. That doesn't mean I'm going to start taking square roots right away. Okay, the first thing I'm going to get rid of is my subtraction here, my minus 1, so I'm going to do plus 1 plus 1. Okay, that's going to leave me with 4x squared equals 16. And I know you're tempted to take a square root right now, but we can't take a square root until we're down to just x squared, or just something squared. So before I can do that, I need to get rid of this 4 here. And I'm going to do that by dividing by 4. Divide by 4, divide by 4. So x squared equals 4. And now that I'm down to just something squared, as soon as the square is the last thing I have to deal with, that's where I take my square root. And as soon as I take my square root, I know I'm splitting into 2 different answers. So one possible answer is that x equals 2. Because the square root of 4 is 2. By the way, these have all been really easy square roots so far. Okay, so I just know them off the top of my head, and hopefully you do too. But even if you don't, you can type these into a calculator. Let me finish this out, and then I will talk more about the calculator. So my other possibility for the square root of 4 is negative 2. So x could also equal negative 2. So x could equal 2 or negative 2. Again, I could also write that as x equals plus or minus 2. I would take either one of those answers, but you must have the positive and the negative in there to get the answer right. To type a square root into your calculator, if you're working on a fancier scientific calculator or a graphing calculator, usually what you'll have is a button that says x squared. That's how you square things. And then up above that you'll see the square root symbol. So usually you have to hit second plus this x squared key. Okay, so if you hit second plus x squared, that's how you're going to get your square root symbol in there. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, negative 3x squared plus 2 equals 77. So I'm going to have to get rid of this 2 and this negative 3 before I touch the x squared, which means I'm not doing any square rooting until I get down to that x squared. If you're confused by that, kind of ask yourself, if that equation were written without the x squared, if it was just an x, negative 3x plus 2 equals 77. You guys have been solving equations like this one forever. Okay, you've been solving two-step equations forever, and all of you know that you would subtract the 2 and then divide by the negative 3. That's what you're going to do here too, just your last step is going to be one more step to get rid of that square. Okay, so from here I'm going to do what I just said. I'm going to subtract 2. So I end up with negative 3x squared equals 75. Divide by negative 3. Divide by negative 3. And I end up with x squared equals negative 25. Okay, now I'm going to take a square root. So let's go ahead and take a square root and a square root. Alright, what would the square root of negative 25 be? Try typing it into your calculator right now. See what it gives you. I'll wait. Okay, hopefully you tried it, and when you took the square root of negative 25, your calculator probably gave you an error, and you probably think that you did it wrong, but you didn't. It was supposed to give you an error, because I want you to think back to what we were saying at the beginning, what it means to be a square root. When I take the square root of negative 25, okay, when I'm looking for something that's a square root to negative 25, I'm just going to put a question mark there. What I want is some number that when I square it, it equals negative 25. Well, squaring, okay, this here, squaring, means that I want to multiply my mystery number by itself, so mystery number multiplied by mystery number, and have it come out to equal negative 25. Well, we know 5 times 5 makes 25, so if I did, let's see, positive 5 times positive 5, that comes out to be positive 25. Well, we need a negative 25, so that doesn't work. What about negative 5? Negative 5 times negative 5. Well, that also equals positive 25 because 2 negatives make a positive. So negative 5 doesn't work because we need it to come out negative. The problem is the only way to multiply two numbers and have them come out to be negative is for one of the numbers to be positive, like positive 5, and one of the numbers to be negative. Okay, so we could get negative 25 if we multiply positive 5 by negative 5. But that's not what the definition of squaring is. Squaring means to multiply the exact same number by itself, and these two are not the exact same number. Okay, 5 and negative 5 are not the same. So we don't have a way to find one single number where I could multiply by that exact same single number and have it come out to be negative, because 2 positives make a positive and 2 negatives also make a positive. Okay? So the point I'm trying to get at is I can't take the square root of negative 25. I can't take the square root of anything negative because I can't find that one number that could multiply by itself to come out to be negative. It's not possible, okay? Because the only way you can multiply to be negative is with 1 plus and 1 minus. So this, as soon as you get something like this where you're taking the square root of a negative number, this is no solution. This is not possible. okay? So if you're taking the square root of a negative number, it's not possible, okay? And so we would say that the answer is no solution. There's no possible number I could put in for x here that would make this equation work, okay? And that's what I meant earlier when I said there was an exception to there being two solutions to everything, because sometimes there's no solution, but if there is a solution, there's always two of them, okay? If there's not a solution, it's just no solution. Okay, so again, that comes up anytime you're taking a square root of a negative number. Okay, here's another weird looking one. X minus 3 squared equals 64. And I know you're probably going to look at that and say, well, let's add 3 to both sides. Good thinking, except this time that minus 3 is trapped inside these parentheses. And let's bring up our friend SADMAP again. Okay, parentheses is way down at the end. Okay, parentheses are like the last thing I get rid of. I can't get in these parentheses, I can't do anything inside here until I ditch these parentheses. And to get rid of those parentheses, I need to get rid of everything on the outside. So I need to get rid of the exponent first this time. Okay, so I need to get rid of everything outside of the parentheses. Once I get rid of everything outside of the parentheses, it's kind of like the guards are gone. Okay, I can break those numbers out of jail there. I can get them out of the parentheses because there's no numbers outside the parentheses anymore. So with this one, what's going to happen is I need to get rid of the square right away. So I'm going to start right off the bat by taking a square root. But remember, the point where you take a square root is the point where you split into two different answers. Doesn't matter if it's at the beginning of the problem or the end of the problem. So when I take a square root over here, all that's really going to happen is the square root and the square are going to cancel each other out. And I will be left with x minus 3. Okay, so x minus 3 could equal, let's see, the square root of 64 is 8. So x minus 3 could equal 8. Or, again, square root of x minus 3 squared is just x minus 3. So x minus 3 could equal the other square root of 64, which would be negative 8. Now these ones are a little bit different because normally that point where I take the square root, if you look back at the other examples that we've done, that's where we're done with the equation. We're done with the problem. Right after we take the square root, we say this is our final answer and we walk away. Here we're not done yet. We still have more work to do. Okay? So with this one, it's not just going to be, well, let me show you what I see a lot of. So if we were to solve this, x minus 3 equals 8. Add 3, okay, and we would say x equals 11 is one of our answers. So I see a lot of people do that and then just say, oh, it must be plus or minus 11, because that works in a lot of the equations. The problem is, that's not what happens when you solve this over here. If I add 3 on each side here, I end up with x equals negative 5. So I still get two different answers, but this time it's not just a plus or minus. This time it's two totally different numbers. And that's because I made my split way earlier in the problem. Okay, so I kind of went down two totally different paths. So don't just assume that it's always going to be plus or minus the same number, because if you take the square root before the rest of your equation is done, which we had to do here because we had to get this out of the parentheses, if you take the square root before the equation is done, you've got to solve each one separately and get two different numbers. Okay? So this would not just be plus or minus 11. You can't assume that, because x minus 3 could equal positive 8 or x minus 3 could equal negative 8, but that gives you two different answers. Okay? So for this one, I would just leave my final answer like this, x equals 11 or x equals negative 5. Let's try one more, and this last one has everything I could possibly throw at you in it all at one time. Okay, so this last one, like I said, has a little bit of everything. So let's take a look at SADMAP again. And again, SADMAP is kind of the order that you solve an equation in. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is look for subtraction and addition. but not the subtraction and addition that's inside the parentheses. I have to get rid of the parentheses last. Okay? So what I'm looking for is outside of the parentheses. When you have a problem like this one, where you've got something locked in the parentheses, but then a lot of blah, blah, blah on the outside, get rid of the stuff on the outside first. Then we can take a square root to get into the parentheses, and then we can get rid of the stuff inside the parentheses. That's sort of your order. So I would start this one by getting rid of the subtraction, which is this minus 4. So I'm going to add 4 and add 4. Okay, so now this says 6 times x plus 1 squared equals 6. Okay, this is gone. Now, so I got rid of my subtraction and addition. Now I'm going to go to my division and multiplication. That would be division and multiplication, again, outside of the parentheses. So I have this 6 here. By the way, a lot of people at this point want to distribute the 6. But remember, when you're solving the equation, you're trying to get rid of everything. So I don't want to distribute the 6. I want to get rid of the 6. So I would divide by 6, divide by 6. That's gone. And so now I have x plus 1 squared equals 1. Okay, because 6 divided by 6 is 1. Okay, so now I'm up to my exponents. Okay, which that's the last thing I need to get rid of to be able to break these guys out of jail here. Okay, I need to be able to get to the x plus 1 inside the parentheses. So I'm going to get rid of this square next. I'm going to take a square root. And as soon as I take a square root, that's where I know I'm going to split into two different problems. So one of my problems is going to say x plus 1, because over here the square and the square root canceled out and I'm left with just x plus 1. Okay, so x plus 1 equals, well, let's see, the square root of 1 is 1. Okay, could be 1. Or, again, x plus 1 could equal, the other square root of 1 would be negative 1. Okay, so you've got to write those as two separate equations. And that's why you'll see way back in like the first couple examples we did, even though it seemed really easy to just jump to the final answer of like plus or minus 4, I always did this. I always wrote it as like, here's one possibility, here's the other. Because when you get to these, it's important that you know that there's two different possibilities there. And then from here, if I were to solve minus 1, that gives me x equals 0, which is a totally valid answer. Or here, if I subtract 1 and subtract 1, I get x equals negative 2. Okay, negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. So final answer, x could be 0 or x could equal negative 2. Okay, so now you've got some homework problems to work on that are very similar to these. Make sure you look back at these examples as you're doing the homework. A lot of them are very similar to what you're going to see on your homework. And remember, on your homework, every problem, let's do this. On your homework, every problem has two solutions. Every problem has two solutions unless it has no solutions. I know that sounds like a Dr. Seuss riddle or something, but every problem you do is going to have two solutions unless it has no solutions at all. And sometimes it's going to be a really easy two solutions, like x equals plus or minus 3. Or it's going to be something like those last couple that we did where it's x equals 5 or x equals 7, something like that. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. To get full credit, you do need to have both solutions for every problem. Okay? So just getting one solution is not enough. All right, good luck to you.